evening. Welcome to Wolverhampton and Ask the Leader. The 2019 election is one of the most significant in your lifetime and could affect how we live our lives for decades. In this edition of Ask the Leader, voters have a chance to question one of the two leaders of the Green Party, Jonathan Bartley, about their promises to you at this election. Now, our audience have a wide range of political views. Some support the Green Party, some support other parties, and some are undecided. Their current views on Brexit broadly reflect the way the country voted in the EU referendum. Mr. Bartley, good evening.
Good evening.
Right, let's go straight away to our audience.
What is the point in voting Green in Birmingham? I've spoken to a lot of people who want to vote Greens, but don't because they see it as a wasted vote, because Birmingham is fairly safely Labour. So how are you going to convince people to vote Greens?
I think every single Green vote at this election will send a message to Westminster that we urgently and desperately need to change course. The impact of the climate emergency, if we don't address it now, does not bear thinking about. We have a once-in-a-lifetime, literally, opportunity to change direction, and we have to do it now. And we've seen over the last few years how the other parties have suddenly started to fall over themselves to try and green up their policies. We've been setting the agenda.
So what's the point of voting Green, then?
Because it will. When you vote Green, the other parties instantly know they have to try and get those votes back. It's a huge influence. We've seen Labour change their policies, not nearly enough to do what's needed, but they have started to shift in that direction.
So why shouldn't people here vote Labour?
Because they won't deliver what is needed to secure our future. They won't deliver what is needed to tackle the climate emergency. Only the Green Party is putting forward the kind of proposals that this country needs to tackle that existential crisis.
So is it fair to say that, to some, it's reasonable to call the Green Party a protest vote?
Not at all. I think it's reasonable to call the Green Party the most powerful vote that you can possibly cast in this election. I mean, when you look at the policies of the other parties right now, they're not putting forward anywhere near the amount of investment that we need. We know that the climate emergency, if we don't tackle it, is going to cost us trillions, as well as threatening the very environment which we all rely on to exist. So right now, voting for the Green Party says we need a change of course. We urgently need to think in a much bigger way. We can live larger, fuller, better lives. We can slash the cost of living. We can have that wonderful public transport infrastructure that we really deserve. We can have schools and hospitals that are fit for purpose. Now is the time to make that change of direction as a country.
You talked about trillions, and you want to spend $1 trillion over 10 years to get to net zero emissions of greenhouse gases by 2030 in order to stabilise temperatures. Most of that you would borrow. Why do you potentially want to cripple the economy aiming for 2030 when the highly respected and independent Committee on Climate Change has said 2050 should be our target?
Well, let's take that last point first. 2050, by the Committee on Climate Change's own admission, will only leave us with a 50% chance of avoiding runaway climate change. Just think about that.
Well, they said,
50%
hang on a minute.
chance.
Their report this year said setting a legal target before 2050 does not currently appear credible. Your target's not credible.
They haven't seen our manifesto. But what I will say is that we have to do what science demands, not what is deemed politically possible.
With respect, the Committee on Climate Change is made up of eminent climate scientists, professors, researchers, academics and other experts who say 2030 is not credible. Why would anyone trust you, with respect, a mere politician, to when you say 2030 has to be the target?
Business as usual is not an option. We have to do this. And right now, we need to make that kind of investment. And at the end of the Second World War, we had a level of debt that is much higher as a proportion of GDP than it is today. But we set up the welfare state. We set up the NHS. Think back to the new deals that were put forward in America with unprecedented investment on this scale. You know what? We have enough money to wage a war. We have enough money to bail out the banks. And if the climate was a bank, we would have bailed it out by now.
The Green Party are pledging 100 billion a year Where's that money coming from, and how is that going to affect other services?
That's a really, really good question. We are being completely honest and upfront, which I hope is a bit of a refreshing change for a politician to say where we're getting the money from. Over £90 billion would be borrowed, so it'd be added to public borrowing. The remainder of that £100 billion we raised from increasing corporation tax to 24%, which is the OECD average. Now, we're in an era of unprecedented low interest rates, and it makes sense to use that opportunity to borrow now. Now, if you're going to build a hospital, it's going to last 10, 20, 30, 100 years. Generations are going to benefit from that. So it makes sense to spread that cost out by borrowing. That's what you do for infrastructure. You spread it out because more people will benefit from it. So to make that investment, pooling the risk is the common sense thing to do.
Do you want to, I mean, do you like the sound of that? Do you want to borrow that amount of money?
No, not really. I think that would affect, obviously, us as a country, getting in more debt.
So what if I told you that would create over 3 million well-paid, good jobs, completely restoring industry in this country to where it should be?
Do you buy that, Gary?
No.
If it would cut your bills on your home, super insulate your home so you got less energy demand, give you cheaper energy, slash the cost of public transport, give you great rail links right up and down the country. You know, this is the kind, we have been cheated and we have been let down by a decade of austerity that was unnecessary. We should have taken this opportunity when the financial crisis hit.
I wonder if those kind of colossal spending promises only come from a party that doesn't think it's ever going to be in power.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting, isn't it, that immediately after we announced that we were going to break this consensus on austerity, the other parties suddenly started to fall over themselves, actually, and said, oh, maybe we can borrow, having told you that we can't borrow for this last decade. Having put that burden on the backs of the poorest all this time, suddenly that consensus is broken, and we are setting the agenda in this election.
You are promising to spend £236 billion more per year than we currently spend. So altogether, it's what?
236 over 10 years? Well, we're making a lot of savings.
With what we spend now, which is £842 billion per year, according to the Treasury. I mean, how could the people here trust you to spend that amount of money wisely?
Well, it's going to involve a massive devolution of power down to the local level. So that money is not going to be held in our hands. It's going to be put in the hands of local communities and local authorities. Because they are best placed to know where that money will have the greatest effect. But can I also add that it's also about what we don't do and the savings that we should make. Don't spend £105 billion renewing pointless Trident nuclear weapons. Don't spend 80 to £100 billion on a high-speed rail link that's going to concrete over large areas of the countryside, destroy 106 ancient woodlands, when it could be put into a local transport revolution that will benefit the whole country, not just drain wealth to London again.
Is this the kind of spending anybody in this room wants to see? We've heard rounds of applause. Well, OK, there's a mixture of views here. Yes, hello.
I absolutely think that the level of investment that you're suggesting is inspiring, and I think that if the Labour Party was suggesting it, a lot of people would be getting behind that as well. I think that the Conservative Party have told a lot of lies about the fact that they have increased the national debt, and it's refreshing to having lived in a country that's had austerity for the last 10 years, to hear a political party leader saying, you know, actually we are going to increase the spending and increase the borrowing, and that's not a bad thing.
Can I just put this to you? The level of UK debt at the moment is 1.8 trillion. You happy to see it go up to 2.8 trillion with the green spending plans?
If we don't tackle the climate emergency, there will be no country in which to have this debate. We will see mass migration on a level that we've never seen before. We will see food shortages. We will, you know, we have to take radical steps, because if we don't, the future looks very, very, very grim.
OK, let's talk about some radical steps then. The kind of things that you've talked about in your manifesto. The money that you would spend to tackle climate change would go on things like decarbonising public transport, insulating all our homes, ripping out polluting gas boilers in every home. Do you know how many gas boilers there are in this country, Mr. Bartley?
I know what we are proposing to rip out, or rather put in a scrappage scheme so people have the choice when their boilers come to the end of their life to renew them with cleaner alternatives.
Well,
we want to do 1 million a year. I mean, I'm reckoning there's probably about 40 million. Probably.
OK. There's actually about 25 million gas boilers.
I've overestimated.
No, it's fine. But 1 million a year would mean ripping out 3,000 boilers a day. Have you ever tried to get a gas engineer out? I'm serious.
We saw.
Not realistic.
Okay, I'll give you an example of how it can be realistic.
Okay.
So 10 years ago, when we had government create the incentives to put solar panels on roofs, suddenly we had a mass explosion, because when the government gives the signal that this is what they want to do, the private sector also puts in money, also recognises that we can save people bills. People do it because it's common sense, because it saves them money,
I'm not arguing that. I'm simply asking, where are all the gas engineers going to come from?
Because we've got 4.5 million people who are economically inactive in this country, as well as 1 million unemployed. This is an opportunity to give people the training that they need to provide those secure jobs. And of course, when we do that, we're going to get additional tax revenue in, which will help to service the payments. It makes sense. This is what's happened with the New Deals, with the Marshall Plan. It's what happened after the Second World War. We can do it now.
OK, I want you to be really clear with people about what you would do, what you are promising. Your manifesto promises to ban petrol and diesel cars in 10 years, is that correct?
To stop the production of them in 10 years.
Right. So if you currently work in a car factory here in the Midlands, like Jaguar Land Rover or Toyota up the road in Derby, that job will disappear in a decade?
No, because we have to transition the economy, we have to transform the economy, and that's why it's so
but
important
that job will
to
disappear.
retrain. There'll be a change to new employment. We know that this government...
Sorry. A job in a car factory will disappear in a decade.
A job in a car factory may become a job producing an electric vehicle.
Right.
I mean,
so is the answer to the fact that this job may not exist in 10 years, yes, it won't exist?
Well, jobs will change. We're in a rapidly changing environment. All jobs are changing continually. We know that this government...
Hang on a minute. I'm really sorry. You've got to be really clear about this. Yeah. I have read your 88-page manifesto thoroughly, and I can tell you that you don't mention job losses once.
Because we're talking about the jobs that we're going to create, and we're also talking about the jobs that we're going to transition.
Do you want politicians to be honest with you?
If you've got a car factory and you're producing petrol or diesel cars, we know that this government will do it, or just do it a bit later, that at some point soon we're going to have to stop those fossil fuel cars and they're going to have to become electric cars.
What do
so of
people
course
think about
those
this?
jobs are going to change.
Of course those jobs are going to change, OK. Yes, sir, at the back.
Yeah, so I know for a fact that down at Jaguar Land Rover, they're spending record amounts of money on electric vehicle development. So I believe, Jonathan, wholeheartedly, these jobs are going to transition across. They will. So I disagree with you.
Yes?
Right, Jonathan, you want everybody to have electric cars. Are we all going to afford those? Are you going to do electric trains? Are you do electric aeroplanes? How's it going to work, Jonathan?
Sure. So on the electric cars point, I don't think it is a matter of simply trading in all the fossil fuel cars at the end of their life, or when they've passed their use-by date, and replacing them with electric, because we know that when you produce an electric car, it does take maybe 9 to 12 tonnes of carbon per car, and you leave that car by the side of the road for 95% of the time. It's a very inefficient use of resources. We're going to have to think in new ways. Now, just think of what's happened in the economy recently, just over the last few years, with the age of Uber, with the Zip car, things that we never thought were possible. We're starting to pull, we're starting to share. So I think as those cars come to the end of their lives, we need to be thinking in new ways about how we organise the transport right across the country. We can't beat people over the head to make those choices, but we can give them the options to have that cheap, affordable public transport for the school run, for the commute, for the shopping run, that work for people so they can make those choices themselves.
Are you happy to give up your petrol car,
Can
Carol?
I just ask, right?
Are you happy to give up your petrol car?
No. I've had my petrol car for 20 years next January, and it's, touch wood, it's going great. Now, answer me this question. There's a lot of cars and transports and lorries on the road. How on earth are you going to plug all these automobiles and lorries into a roadside? Because now,
let him answer that.
You go to supermarkets and people have to plug in. You go to the garages, they have to plug in. So all this traffic Where is it going to plug in?
Well, I mean, that's a really important point, because if you just make lots of electric cars, you don't deal with the congestion problems. We know that there is also particulate emissions from the tyres and from the brakes of cars that is causing deaths in this country as well. So electric cars aren't going to sort that. So we need to cut demand use of cars, but that means putting on new bus routes, new options for people to take transport, new train lines right around the country, a major, major upgrade for our whole transport infrastructure. But in terms of the capacity for those people who will have electric vehicles, the whole electricity grid does need a massive upgrade, and that is also in our manifesto. We need to put that investment in now.
Would you make flying cripplingly expensive?
No, we wouldn't. What we want to do is introduce a frequent flyer levy, and that wouldn't impact well, I'll come to it. That wouldn't impact the first flight. But the more flights that you take, the levy would increase. So in replacing airport passenger duty at the moment.
So it would kick in after one return flight?
After you've taken the one return flight, with the second flight, the third flight a year, yes, it would kick in.
How much would it be?
We would have to consult and look at how we address the demand. So the key demographic that we're trying to hit is that 70% of the flights in the country are taken by 15% of the people. There's this massive binge flying by quite a small number of people, that 15%.
OK, so what would the levy be?
So you'd want to impact the demand, and so
what would it be?
contain the demand. So you'd have to consult, you'd have to pilot the scheme to find out what the demand level is. No, we don't know until you try it out and see what the demand level is and how you can control it.
Response to that, reaction to that?
Yeah, I want to pick up where Victoria's coming from. I'm all for swapping to electric cars. And,
I want you to respond to the flying point. A frequent flyer levy. Would you welcome that?
Yes, but I can't say yes or no until I know how much it is, of course. I need to have a better idea. And
does it seem right that it would kick in after one return flight?
Flying is expensive, and it's not expensive enough given the amount of environmental damage that there is.
Yes, sir.
I want to talk about the role of big banks into climate crisis.
I'm going to keep on flying for a second, if I may, Masood. Do you mind? Just respond to that. Yes.
I'm an American citizen. I've lived in this country almost 50 years. The first couple of years, either my parents flew over or we flew over there. They've gone. And now I haven't flown to the States for 4 years. I'm not intending to fly. You know, these are it's my sister, my cousins, my nieces, my nephews. They're all over there.
And you're not flying?
I'm not
because
flying.
You want to, because you care about the planet?
Because I care about the climate.
OK. Are you going to ban private jets?
No, that's not in our manifesto to ban private jets.
I mean, I'm just wondering, if you're rich, you can carry on then flying in your private jets and you can afford the frequent flyer levy. So is there not a possibility of creating a two-tier system where people on lower incomes are penalised in the way that the rich won't be?
I mean, I think that's a really interesting idea. Our manifesto is going to need to change and adjust. There are other proposals that we're going to need to bring
Sounds like you're acknowledging that there could be a two-tier system then.
I'm acknowledging that there might be a place, certainly, for curbing private jets. But what I will say is that there's also an issue over the aviation fuel as well. One of the subsidies that we give to the aviation industry is that there's no tax on the fuel. It's unbelievable. It's a massive, massive subsidy. Now, we need a carbon tax to make sure that the true cost of what that is doing to our environment, doing to our planet, doing to our air is...
And who would be hit by the carbon tax? Who would be paying the carbon tax? People here?
It would hit, no. Well, we hope that it will be shouldered by big business in order to transition that big business particularly. It's anything that's to do with the fossil fuel that's produced, the amount of carbon that's produced.
And you say you're going to raise $76 billion from the carbon tax?
That's our estimate, yes.
From big business?
No, from the tax. And we want that tax to be borne by big business. We also want to cushion...
So that's a guarantee no one here will be paying the carbon tax?
No. So big business will have to decide whether they're going to take that from their profits or whether they're going to pass it on to those of us who consume. Now, obviously, we have to get off our addiction as a society to fossil fuels. So we're trying to make that transition easy. But also we are implementing a universal basic income, which will help supplement any price increases. So people have that choice about where they spend their money, that additional purchasing power, so they can make those choices and they are made secure in the transition to the low-carbon economy.
OK. It's been quite refreshing that we're about 20 minutes in and nobody's mentioned Brexit yet. But I know that there are some people who do want to mention Brexit. Yes. Do you want to talk about Brexit?
Yeah, so your version of democracy seems to be vote, vote, vote again until you get the answer you want. I campaigned in that referendum, and I looked people in the eye on the doorstep and said, this is the biggest decision of your lifetime, and we're going to respect that vote. Why do you want to rerun that?
Sure. The second biggest issue for me is Brexit right now. People in my family voted to leave. It's ripped apart myself and my friends. I know that many people have experienced that as well. The last 3 years have been hell. The debate has been toxic. And we have to look at how we are going to unite and bring together this country to find a way forward.
So another referendum would be the way to unite the country?
Just let me finish, because I think this is so important. I think that we were lied to and deceived on both sides of this. I think the referendum was shocking. It was scare tactics on both sides. We've got to learn as a country how to disagree well and move forward. And I think that a people's vote is our best shot at doing that. We weren't given a prospectus. We weren't given a prospectus at the time of the referendum. We weren't even talking about the Irish border question. There were so many unknowns. Sorry.
It votes the same way. Will you respect it then, or will you have another referendum after that?
Of course.
When are you going to stop?
No, of course.
Just want it done and dusted.
We've had the vote. Why don't you stick to it and get on with it?
Democracy needs to be meaningful, and it needs to carry the confidence of the population. We need to have a good... We've been shut out of this process for the last 3 years.
Why will the next referendum be any better than the last one?
Yeah, what they're going to do, any different?
Because I think over
what will happen in Scotland? Will they carry on having referendums every 2 years?
Over the last 3 years, I think I've certainly learned a lot more. And Caroline, my colleague, has been visiting Leave constituencies and Leave areas around the country, reaching out, talking and engaging to the people who voted Leave. We've been having constructive debates. The conversation has got better, even though it has been pretty toxic.
You're not accusing them of being stupid. They had their views, and now they need to be
respected. As I said, people in my family voted Leave. I would never, ever call them stupid. I want to understand...
Mr. Bartley, can I just check this?
Yes.
Second vote, you'd obviously put Remain on the ballot paper. If Remain won and Leavers wanted a third referendum, would you agree to that?
I think we'd have to see why they wanted it.
Because they didn't like the result.
Well, that's not why. Come on, Victoria, we know that it's not a simple case of not liking the result. I've explained why I feel that we need a people's vote. It is by finding the way forward to unite the country, to get us out of this mess, not simply having a government that has ignored for 3 years the population. There was no engagement or consultation about the Brexit deal. They basically said, now leave it to us, and they've messed it up.
Right.
They've made a total cock-up of the whole thing.
Just to be clear, if people wanted a third referendum, what would you say?
I want to listen to the arguments, and I want to hear them clearly, and I want to know the reasons why. I'm putting my case for why I think we need the people's vote.
How many referenda would there be? When would you say no?
Look.
When would it stop?
It's not a question of having referendum after referendum. It's a question of having a meaningful process that allows us to take forward in a sensible, common-sense way.
OK, let's move it around.
And the Second World War was over in 6. Okay. We can just draw a line over it now, surely.
I don't think, with respect, that's a helpful analogy to talk about a war. I know it is...
You've talked about how your family...
Hang on, let's move it around the audience. Yes, sir.
Thank you. With the greatest respect, Jonathan, the referendum result had 17.5 million people who voted for it. And actually, Cameron said to all of us, we give you the power. The only thing that happened was the result wasn't what he wanted or the political establishment wanted. And ever since then, the House of Commons has tried everything in its power, because 3/4 of the politicians, they're Remainers. And they've tried including the Speaker, actually, we're leaning to the other side.
Let him
respond. So that has actually stopped democracy working. And the reason people are angry is the fact that they voted with the good intention of their heart, listening to what they had to do, and now they find that you have a second one or a third one, and it will never end.
OK, let him respond. Briefly.
I understand why you feel that it would never end, and I think we need a process that carries the confidence as much as is possible of the country. And so my question, I guess, back to you would be, do you feel that this referendum process, the referendum to now, has carried the confidence of the country? Is it going to be something that is going to unite and take us forward together? Or do we need a more meaningful conversation, a more respectful conversation?
At the end of the day...
Hang on. I want to move things around. Yes or no to that?
Very quickly.
Go on.
At the end of the day, we were given that choice, and you cannot keep changing it all the time. We were given that choice, and it's got to be upheld. For the sake of democracy and for the sake of trust in the politicians and in the institutions that we have. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of angry people out there.
OK. Yes, sir. I think you're weighing up the Greens and the Conservatives. Is that right, sir?
Well, it just seems to me that by taking Brexit to a people's vote, you're just delaying action on climate change. It seems like you're going to be focusing more on Brexit compared to climate change. It seems to me let's get Brexit sorted and let's focus on climate change.
All right, I'm going to move it round. Yes, I think you were arrested, were you not, earlier this year as a member of Extinction Rebellion? Jonathan Bartley shared something with you. He too was arrested. Presumably you're going to vote Green.
I actually haven't decided yet.
Why is it not a no-brainer?
Because I am voting, my vote will be used to ensure that the Conservatives don't stay in power. And for me, that's the most important thing.
OK.
I would love to be able to vote Green, and I would love to be able to vote Green and to have a Green MP. But in my constituency, that's unlikely. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to vote Green. I just haven't decided yet. OK. Couple of very quick-fire policies that you talk about in your manifesto in the last few minutes. A big flagship policy is a universal basic income of £89 per week for every single one of you, for every adult. Every adult, whether they need it or not, yes or no?
Yes.
So you would give it to multimillionaires like Raheem Sterling, like Adele, like Lord Sugar?
It has to be seen with our progressive taxation policies.
But what's the answer to the question?
The question, yeah, I've answered it already. That's twice, yes. OK,
so isn't that just wasting British taxpayers' money?
No, because you're, as I was about to say, claw it back through our progressive taxation. We are putting forward the most radical proposals for taking the wealth of the richest and putting it back in the hands of the poorest. Now, you want a very simple and transparent system to be able to administer that. It's very, very, very hard to avoid that kind of taxation under the proposals that we're making. And we face a very clear choice. You know, we can go on with this mistaken idea that a rising tide will float all boats, in pursuing endless GDP, which we know is destroying our country and creating rampant inequality. And people are drowning. We need an alternative way of supporting those who need it most, but getting that wealth back from the richest and putting it back in the hands of those who need it most.
History tells us that you're unlikely to win a majority in the election, and there's already been discussions apparently about partnering up with other parties. In terms of forwarding the environmental agenda, which I think we're all sympathetic towards, would you not be more effective disbanding as a party and dispersing yourself amongst the main parties and forming green wings within there, where you might actually have more influence than you're going to have as a protest vote, as we discussed earlier?
So of course, there are green groups in every party trying to do precisely that. But the electoral mechanism of winning votes is what politicians' minds are concentrated on. So when there is a massive green vote, as we saw in the European elections, where we doubled our number of MEPs, on the previous local elections, where we doubled the number of councillors, you know, is it any wonder now the other parties are falling over themselves to try and claim the green ground back? That's how you get the electoral change, is by winning votes. And that's why voting for the Green Party is the most powerful thing you can do right now to change the whole agenda. OK. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for this evening. Thank you very much to Jonathan Bartley and to you, our audience. From all of us here, good night.